Hey, I want to welcome to our Wednesday night service here, Family Revival Center. I'm Rusty Pigott, substituting a little bit here for Pastor Tommy Howard, and I want to thank him for the opportunity to let me share here with you tonight. I want to thank our folks behind the scenes, Mindy and Jake, and for doing what they're doing. I want to especially thank Jake, because part of what we're going to talk about now is kind of his, he gave me the idea, or he had the idea, and I was just sort of kind of taking and run with it. So, we're going to spend the first part of this. I'm going to get to a specific little talk here in just a little bit, but kind of something that we've been talking about, Pastor Tommy and I have been talking about. Of course, it's kind of all in lines of what Jake and I have been trying to give it a name, and I don't know if we want to call it Operation 315 or Project 315, but as you can imagine, the name there comes from a verse, and it comes from 1 Peter 3:15, and this is from the Amplified. But in your hearts, set Christ apart, giving him first place in your lives as Lord. Always be ready to give a defense or a logical defense to anyone who asks you to account for the hope and confident assurance that is within you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And that's kind of this always be ready is what I'm going to focus on here. Because if we are to be always ready give an answer to a question about something spiritual or biblical in nature. Well, what does that require? Well, obviously it requires us to be knowledgeable, correctly knowledgeable of the subject matter, whatever it is that you're being asked. Because, in the big picture of things, the occasion for someone to ask you a question in this nature is a great commission opportunity. Of course, as Christians, we're commanded, commissioned, to go into all the world and preach the gospel. So when if you have the occasion for someone to ask you a question, that's an opportunity to go into their world. And, some people are defensive and whatnot, but when someone's asking you something, and for the most part, a lot of that you will have led up to that by being nice to them, being friendly, maybe saying a kind word, planting a little seed here, a little seed there. And of course, we always want to be planting good seed, and we know that the Bible is obviously the Word is good seed. Because in reality, in our daily lives as we go out to, we're sowing seeds everywhere we go. Ideally, we hope that those are good seeds, a good Word seed. But of course, there's a bad seed, or the weed seeds, and we don't need to be sowing any of those, because there's enough of them out there already. Because if we open the Word, the weeds choke out the good seed. So, hopefully we're sowing that good seed, which is the truth, and not bad seeds. Now, of course, unfortunately, and this is kind of just where we're going here, we may be reluctant to put ourselves in a position to field a question simply because we're not confident in what we know, or we just simply don't know it, or we don't know what the right answer might be. Or maybe even worse, we're asked a question we either don't know or mistakenly think we know when we really don't. We may have this tendency to either be dismissive or to maybe give some wholly inaccurate response. There's another one. Actually, this is a big one. It's a little bit when we answer a question under the presumption that the person asking the question more than we think they know a little more than they really do. So, example of that is just real world. Suppose one of your missions in life is to give direction. Right? And so I ask you for directions to someone's house. And you tell me, well, go down to John's house and then take a right and go a little bit further down the road. Go to Sally's house and then take a left. And your destination will be 3 houses down on the right. Well, you have given me some good directions. But I don't know who John is, and I don't know who Sally is, or where they're at. You haven't helped me at all. And so, did you fulfill your mission? No, I don't think you did. You may have told me the truth, might have been sincere about it, but you presumed that I knew something that I didn't, and thus what you told me was pointless. Another example that I didn't tell her about this, but let's suppose, where is Kathy? There's Kathy. has made a cake. And of course, it's a good cake. And let's suppose Kathy's mission in life is to tell people how to make cakes. And so Kathy's made this good cake, and it tastes so good. And I go, Kathy, how'd you make this cake? Well, all Kathy tells me is, well, I followed the recipe. Okay, that may very well be true, but she wasn't giving me the answer that I need. Okay, Kathy makes good cake, everybody knows that. But don't give someone, and if you've given them an answer, presuming they know something they don't, I'm going to stop it too. And we can't blame the person for not asking a better question or not having more knowledge, because remember, the people we're trying to reach are lost. They don't know where they are. They don't know what they're asking. They may have some inclination as to what to ask. But let's turn it around where if we can't give them the answer they need, whose fault is that? Well, it's our fault. Not only should we know better, we should know more. So the idea of this project, I'm going to try to skip through here a little bit, is to provide both a forum and a resource to sort of remedy this knowledge deficiency. Well, again, it's not like we're not already doing that. We've been hearing good word preached here for going on, 17 years. You want to hear some good preaching, show up on Sunday morning, Sunday school, Sunday night, Wednesday night. You're going to hear some good preaching. So that's
we're preaching good right now.
But I hear you. But what I'm talking about is basically taking it to another level, like we heard kind of a little bit earlier. So how do we get to there? Well, 2 Timothy 2:15 says, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that you not be ashamed. Well, what's the operative word here is study. Study. And what's study? We all know what study is. It's reading, it's hearing. It's not just reading and hearing, but it's reading and hearing and understanding. Line upon line, precept upon precept. Meditating on it day and night. John wrote all these verses. Getting the word inside of us so that when we're presented with that opportunity, we can take full and appropriate advantage of it. So if we're going to fulfill our great commission, the first thing we do is got to be prepared, and that starts with us individually. Because as we see in Matthew 7 and Luke 6, we don't need to be starting out, going out, telling others to get the speck out of their eye until we get the log out of our own eye. And sort of sweep your own porch before you go telling someone to sweep around there, sort of thing. And of course, we all know that. That's something that all this knowledge can help us individually in our daily lives become better people and do the things that we need to be doing. So what should we be doing as a church, both individually, what can I do, or what should we do collectively? Ephesians 4, verses 11 through 13, talks about the gifts of the church, and it talks about apostles and prophets and evangelists and pastors and teachers, shepherds and guiding and instructing, and to what end? To fully equip and perfect God's people for works of service to build up the body of Christ, which is the church. So we all have a role to play. A race is running. And if we're running, we need to be running to win. And if we're running to win, that means we need to be training. In the context of what I'm talking about here, that training is hearing, reading, understanding. So what's your motivation? Well, of course, this is one of those, as you say, to other people and other lands and other churches, but the sad reality is, and I'm not picking on anybody here, I think we have a lot of Bible illiteracy. And I'm talking about Christians, people in the church. People who simply lack basic Bible knowledge, or worse, those who think they know something they really don't. You know, when I mean basic, I'm talking about basic, when I say Sunday school kind of stuff. Stories, people, events, stories that are the foundation of the principles that are so that are the underlying biblical principles which is essential if we ever hope to convey those principles to someone else. I mean, if you just know David killed Goliath, well, that's a good story, but there's a whole lot more to it if you know the greater context of the story. My dad was probably an expert on David and Goliath. And he can tell you, it's not just about David getting Goliath and killed him. There's all kind of biblical principles if you know the greater part of the story. And that's where I kind of hope that, again, where we want to get ourselves to where we do know. So what is this? It's a form, a resource, kind of equip us to know what we need to know and understand what we need to understand to put us in the best position to fulfill our commission. And I guess you might call it sort of academic in nature, or like taking a class, going to school. You know, I thought, who knows, this might be the start of our own Bible college. Quite frankly, I hope it is. And I'm not talking about a substitute for Sunday morning or Sunday night, or about something else. Because why do we need to do this? Knowledge. We gain knowledge, we gain understanding. Gain understanding, we gain wisdom. The word wisdom, we have discernment. And in these days and times, and especially in the upcoming days and times, we need all the discernment we can get. Because I don't know how many remember my last topic. Anybody remember my last topic? Fake news. Because fake news, in whatever form, not just the news on TV, is out there. And it's all about it. Jesus warned us. Deception. Deception is on its way. It's already here. And we'll look in our main topic tonight. It has ruined generations and generations of people. Now, of course, it's not something new. I'm just talking about doing something different. And what particular format this might take, I don't know. There might be some one-on-one stuff, some small group stuff, some Wednesday night stuff, some stuff we can use our video technology and record and add things to. But basically just stepping it up, because times, as some things, they are changing. We heard earlier talking about things changing in the church for the good. Well, and that's what we want. But we got to realize that there's another world out there where things aren't looking so hot. A lot of things going on, a lot of pressure being involved there, and essentially a lot of lost people going to hell. So we have got to step it up and do everything we can to get those folks on the right path. We can't just rely on giving someone some spiritual abstract caveat and expect them to believe. Now, we can do that amongst ourselves, and we kind of know what we're talking about, but I've heard this phrase. I know when people are saying this, I know what they are, and you know what they're saying. But you ever somebody brings somebody a problem, and the response like, "Well, God is in control." Well, I'm not quite sure what that exactly means. I understand the sentiment behind it, but if I'm a lost person, okay, and I hear you're trying to sell me that God is in control, well, I might look around at my situation or the situation around me, and murder, mayhem, transgenderism, and think, well, if that's who you're trying to sell me on that's in control, sorry, no thanks. Because that's not looking good. And missed opportunity, but not only a missed opportunity, you probably made it pretty tough for the next person you might come around and witness it. And if that's the impression you've left with them, is just this abstract caveat of whatever it is that you might send that wasn't answering their question. Now, of course, we are all implored to believe by faith. And that could be a whole lot easier. We just did that. We believe by faith. But the people that we were wanting to get to, we want to point people there to get to there. But in this day of the fake news, the agendas, the fact checkers, I think we have to realize it's going to simply take more than that. Quite frankly, there are people that have to see something to believe it. They need some modicum of proof. And that might just be right here initially to get you in the door, to get you to another level. But some people, you think, well, now some people say, well, wait a minute, Jesus just said only believe. What he did. And he was telling the disciples, look, excuse me, but if you read, he had to tell his disciples over and over and over. And a lot of them still do. But you can just leave them hanging like, well, you didn't get it, you're too bad for you. No, he didn't know, give you an example. Probably the best example, or one that everybody ought to be familiar with. The disciple Thomas, who we all know as Doubting Thomas. If you're familiar with the story, Jesus appears, when he first appeared to his disciples, Thomas wasn't there. And then afterwards, they see Thomas and they say, yeah, we've seen the Lord, he's alive. And what he said, I don't believe that. Unless I see the stars and put my finger, I ain't never going to believe. So, Jesus didn't leave him hanging. Of course, if you know, about a week later, Jesus appears to him again. The first thing it says after he greets him is, basically, Thomas, I hear you not believing. Come over here and take a look. Better than that, we'll put your fingers in here. He provided Thomas, and basically said, stop doubting and believe. Of course, now, again, he says that you're more blessed are them that believe without having to see. But the fact remains that for the one who wanted proof, Jesus gave it to him. And quite frankly, the folks that we're after, they're going to want that proof. They may have questions. They may need to be basically persuaded. Don't get me wrong. I know there's that drawing, but there's that initial getting into the door that it's their unbelief, their ignorance, whatever it is, whatever stumbling block it is. We can't just let them stumble. We need to help remove that because, and sometimes it's difficult for some folks, church folks, to appreciate. And I can't really emphasize this enough, but it depends on who you're around and whatever. But there's a lot of people out there. They don't know the Bible from Harry Potter. They don't know Moses from Muhammad. And why? Well, of course we know why. For over a generation, maybe now 2 generations, we haven't had prayer in school. We haven't had the Bible in school. We're out there with all of the junk that's out there on the TV and the radios and the videos, and it's no wonder that there's this deficiency in biblical learning, knowledge, education, or basic Bible knowledge, if you will. And what they're not deficient in is the deception, the fake side of that. So we can't presume anything, because there's a a lot of people you ask, well, who's God? We might think, everybody knows God. There's somebody like, they don't know him at all. They don't know him from whomever. Or all they know him is, well, he's the big guy in the sky. Or, that's who sends you to hell for being bad. Well, that's their world. They may be wrong, but that's their world. That's their mindset. We've got to come up with ways to, hey man, we need to educate you a little. And of course, going back to the first thing, we've got to do it with gentleness and respect if we're answering whatever questions they may have. So the goal here is to educate ourselves so that we'll be able to educate others, which is often that first step or opening or opportunity that will lead you into a conversation for sharing the gospel. So whatever format that might take, one-on-one, small group. If you don't know, I can tell you somebody who does. That's sort of where I kind of envision this, what we've been talking about this going, and what we've been doing, and what we want to end up doing. And so tonight, now I'm going to kind of flip it around and kind of start with a little example of something, and I hope I don't lose. Some of y'all might think that you might know this, references here pretty well, but I thought, well, if this is Bible 101, where's a better place to start than right to start in Genesis chapter 1? Of course, Genesis 1 is describing, as we know, written by Moses about 3,500 years ago, around 1450 BC, some years after the Exodus. And it's chronicling this sequence of creation again. Now, there's a lot of people that they don't know this. And some of you may not know some of the things I say. But I found it in sort of researching this, that it is amazing to me, the order and sequence of those events described in chapter 1. And I'll be with you. A lot of our modern scientists are now figuring out. They're discovering what was written 3,500 years ago. Oh, look what we've discovered. Kind of getting back to, you'd save yourself a lot of time if you'd only believed it when it was in there. So, and it's sort of a lot of, some of this is, and you know who you're trying to persuade or what their level of knowledge is. You know, one thing that I thought of, and it's sort of significant to me, is here we got Moses. Now, Moses is probably a pretty smart guy. The Egyptian culture, probably fairly advanced, and you could give him all the benefit of the doubt. Every benefit of the doubt. There's no way, smart as Moses might have been, on his own, he would have been able to make the recollection or this account that turns out to be as absolutely spot on as the way it happened. He didn't have a little help. Of course, we know where that help came from. And of course, it's you know, Moses didn't have telescopes, computers, microscopes. He didn't know anything about atoms, electrons. So how could he have done this from his own knowledge or understanding? You know, what's the likelihood of that? Well, the likelihood of that, he couldn't have. So, you know, of course, because there wasn't anybody, what's being described in generally most part of this chapter, there wasn't anybody there, one person there to document it or say, oh, I was there, or whatever. We're talking about things we know with no witness, or we know that there was a witness. But hey, so how did he do it? Well, he had to have a first-hand account because, and we know he had a first-hand account, and it wasn't just someone, it was the someone. That the Creator, our Creator. Hebrew calls it Elohim. No one talks about it. So you may say, well, that sounds good. What? Science, that's something I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. Well, let's just start here. First three words. In the beginning. Now, that may seem fairly thing, well, everybody knows that. You know that the prevailing scientific thought, up until the last century, was that the universe was infinite in its existence. I'm talking about the secular science academic world. There was no beginning. Some of you might have been taught, I remember hearing that in school. It's interesting that evolutionary theory is only possibly plausible if you have this infinitely old universe. Otherwise, it fails. And of course, we know we don't. So it's written back here 35 years, 100 years ago. But there's still, we think it's infinite. But then we started inventing telescopes and microscopes. And you have Einstein, some of these guys started to take another look at it and it's like, wow, it's like there really was a beginning. And in fact, there was. Of course, the typical Hindu just read it and accepted it to start with. But some people have to have proof. And, well, they got their proof. And it turns out to be, that's now the prevailing view. And you might think, well, I hadn't heard that. Well, no, because folks, they don't want to teach that. That goes against that atheistic agenda. Because a lot of these folks obviously are atheists. They deny the existence of God. And they're not exactly jumping on board with the idea of the Creator, but they can't deny the facts that are presented to them, and that, you know, in fact and in truth, there was a beginning. We know that. We all know that because we've accepted by faith. They had to have it proven to them, but the end result is it's been proven to them, and now they believe it. You know, but the truth that there was a beginning is the death knell for the theory of evolution. That's exactly right. Now, because evolution fundamentally flawed. Not only because it denies the existence of God. Now, look here, everybody. If you were answering the question, well, what do you think about evolution? Well, it denies the existence of God. Well, that may not help that person. They might need to know a few more facts. But the so-called science that evolution is based on, it's essentially been debunked. And you're not going to hear that in a classroom, but that's exactly what's happening. And you may say, well, that's what I learned in school. And I don't know that's the point. They're teaching things in school that are not only false, but demonstrably false. Now, we do a long series on the shortcomings of the public school system. We just might do that, but wrong is wrong. Okay? And if you're teaching lies, well, you're not going to get anywhere near the truth. So in the beginning, to some in the science world, that was an aha moment. Well, we've known it all along. So let's finish the rest of the verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The word created there, it's a very interesting word. The Hebrew word bara, B-A-R-A. And this specific word is used 3 times in this chapter, always used in conjunction with God. And it denotes this concept of initiating something new out of nothing, or if you've heard that something, creation ex nihilo. It's a difficult concept to wrap your head around. Now, the heavens and the earth in the Hebrew refer to uniquely to the totality of the physical universe, to include thoughts, matter, energy, space, and time. So essentially, everything that ever was, is, or will be in terms of physical matter, whatever, dirt, dust, element, all came out of that creative God speaking the world into existence. So everything that was ever was had its origin right there. Galaxies, solar systems, stars, planets, rocks, dirt, me, you, all our physical attributes, those physical elements and attributes started right there. When God spoke the world into existence with one word, and as John 1:1 will tell you, the word. Of course, now you got your scientific types that are still reluctant to acknowledge the existence of God. But they recognize, well, hey, we've got a beginning, so it had to have some kind of start, right? And y'all know what they describe, Big Bang. Right? Of course, many of you have watched the Big Bang Theory TV show, and it's got a little opening, and it sort of summarizes the Big Bang sort of cosmological thought of the whole universe was in a hot fizz state and expansion and whatnot. Gigantic explosion. And you might say, well, hey, I don't know about that. How do you relate that to Genesis 1? Well, let's go back and take a look at that word bara. That word describes creating something out of nothing, or better said, creating everything out of nothing. It's a difficult concept to wrap your head around. So let me see if I can give you kind of a small scale comparison of what's being described, both in the Word and what the science over here, what they are essentially describing. So this is, now how many of you have ever seen pictures or videos of atomic blast, like atomic bombs, and things of that nature? The amount of energy that's being released out is just incredible. And the science behind that, nuclear fission, rather complicated, but essentially splitting a single atom, atoms that we can't even see. And then it starts this chain reaction that releases this vast amount of energy, almost instantaneous. One bomb melt a whole city. We're talking about a little bitty bomb. So if in trying to explain what's being described both in the bara, the created word, and what the scientists are talking about as Big Bang cosmology is, think of that atomic bomb exploding on a multiplied out on a scale that scales you can't even imagine. Imagine if the atomic bomb you saw the picture of was as big as my fist, and you think, wow, incredible, wiped out a city. Well, it was as big as this building. Can you imagine that? It was as big as Foley. It was as big as Earth. Kind of hard, kind of incomprehensible. Kind of one of those, as the Bible says, the unfathomable mystery. We might not ever be able to fully get our head wrapped around that. And it's interesting. That force that came out of God speaking that word hadn't stopped. Not even until today. These scientists tell us that our universe is continuing to expand. They'll say it's expanding from that initial thing. Okay, concede that point to them, and the universe is still expanding. And it's enormous, and it's so enormous that it's really unfathomable, almost incomprehensible. But again, we've got Moses recording it 3,500 years before these scientists discovered. So what I want to make about this Big Bang cosmology, and you don't have to get hung up with that. If you believe Genesis 1:1, by faith in God created you. Thank you for sitting in here and indulging me. You don't need it. You got it. It's like I said, the people we may be out there trying to reach, we might need to kind of explore. Maybe you've got a scientific type or somebody that has a little knowledge and they're not right, but they might have a little background that you can speak a little more educated. But back to this Big Bang cosmology and evolution. Even if you accept some of the time frames associated with the scientific version of the Big Bang cosmology, there's still not enough time under the evolutionary theory concept. Big Bang sometimes talks about billions of years. Evolution is hundreds of millions of times more than that. Obviously, it's never going to work because it didn't work because it's not true. But but yet the paradigm of it being taught is still there. And why? Well, we know why. It's because there's deception out there. So, in looking at sort of both of these things from a sort of a, if you've got these signs, well, Big Bang, yeah, but God, yeah. Well, they have to, and some of them are, and there's some people that are, some scientists that are come to the Lord by the realization that, wow, these things really are true. I've proven the Bible. Well, you haven't proven the Bible, you just kind of seen the light, so to speak. But if there was this gigantic explosion at this initial period of time, the scientists used asking themselves questions. Well, if you get to that point, what's the next question that you need to ask yourself? I mean, if you're a scientist, you're asking a question, you're trying to figure something out. Well, if there's this Big Bang, who lit the fuse? Well, we know who lit the fuse, assuming if you follow me. And the Bible makes clear, now, some of them still reluctant to admit it. They'll say, well, it was some causal agent. Okay, well then, they don't want to pick up the existence of God. They'll call it a causal agent. All right, we know who that causal agent is. He's that Elohim, I am, Jehovah, the Word God Almighty. That's who he is. And again, that's all you need to know. If you've already accepted that, you can stop right there with both yourself or anybody else that you're explaining it to. If they say, wow, I get it. Okay, then you move on to something a little else that we might learn about a little bit later. But if not, let's go move on to verse 2. Verse 2 says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the water. So, think about interesting about the difference in verses 1 and 2 is sort of, what's the frame of reference of what are we seeing sort of when we read this sort of thing? Verse 1, we're sort of seeing this big picture. The universe, God's bringing into existence, this sort of this big picture. But in verse 2, we go from sort of this big picture view, come down to what's being described here is what's happening on the surface of the earth. Dark form, without form, void, covered with water. Now, other science, I don't want to bother them, get down to read whatever, but essentially the scientist type now, probably discovery. But what's being described here in verse 2 is exactly what you would expect to find in a planet like Earth at its earliest formation or its existence. Rocky core, surrounded by water, shrouded in whatever cosmic dust, debris, whatever, making it dark. That's what, and it's interesting to me, of course, y'all may certainly know this description of the earth, as it's described in verse 2, is described in several other places in the Bible. It's described in Job, Psalms 104, several other verses that describe this state of the earth. And like, getting back to how could Moses have known that? There ain't no one way Moses could have known that. It got divinely revealed to him. So in the framework reference down the earth, and this the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. That word there, moved on the face, it's sort of that hovered. In the reference here is sort of, it's a word called rahak, the Hebrew word, and it's only used twice in the whole Bible. It's used here in verse 2, and the other one it's in Deuteronomy. And it's just in Deuteronomy, it's describing how a mother bird kind of broods and sits on her nest. And so I thought, I never really thought about that. So in studying this, it sort of intrigued me, and I thought, well, what's the connection to this reference to this hovering and this bird, mother bird reference? So I got looking into just some of the biology of eggs and chickens and hatching and that sort of thing. And, you know, if any of you ever raised chickens, been around chickens, you probably know this. You know, a bird will lay an egg and lay an egg the next day and the next day and the next day. And at some point in time, they'll start hovering over. And it's interesting to me that the eggs that are laid on day 1 and the eggs that are laid on day 10, well, they'll all hatch out at the same time. I'm like, how did that happen? You read a little bit, and it's that brooding that sort of brings that dormancy in the egg to life. And so the reference to what's God doing here? He's getting things ready. He's getting things ready. There's some, I won't bog you down, but there's some science about that and some of the creation or some of the building blocks of life stuff that would really blow your mind, but it's totally consistent with what we find here in verse 2. Might sum it up and say, like God's getting things prepared. So, y'all got a little ways to go, so let's move on to verse 3. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. So if we go back to verse 2, we know, we understand, here's the earth, complete darkness, Spirit of God's hovering over it. Something, now let me add a little, the scientific discoveries in this regard would suggest that the atmosphere of the earth at that time would have been extremely dense. Our atmosphere, we're going to get the creation of our atmosphere a little bit further down in a couple more verses, but at this stage, if they would expect you to find it, it's exactly how it's described here. Dust, debris, and not just on some layer up as like we see the clouds, maybe hundreds of miles even at that stage of development. So it's no wonder that it was dark. If there was light could have penetrated through it anyway. But then, even from the scientific perspective that they live in, something happened. What happened? There's some theories about what happened, but all we need to know from a belief perspective is, like God said, let there be light, and there was light. I don't want to get too much into the scientific needs of everything, but I thought of this illustration. Because it's important point. That phrase there, that's not necessarily a creative word like bara we have of making something out of nothing. It sort of stands for to be, or I think there's a phrase that if you translate it, it's my will that this happened. Not necessarily that create out of nothing word. Okay? You don't have to get hung up on that. But that's out there. And so anyway, so I got to think about it, an illustration of, well, what if whatever it is that caused the light to come had its origin back in verse 1? Like when God created the earth, or created everything, spoke it into existence, and he set something in motion that came back and sort of solved this darkness problem at that particular time. And I don't know, but I had to solve this illustration. You ever seen people that are trick shot pool people? And you'll have hitting the cue ball right here, setting something in motion, and it'll hit and knock and hit and kick off and bang, and eventually hit and knock something in, which might be the goal. That's sort of, I think, maybe a way to think about what might have happened in verse 3 in the light. If it wasn't creating the light, it was just letting, of course the word let there is sort of like somebody at the door. If I'm at the door, and there's a door there, what do you say to somebody on the inside? You say, well, let them in. Well, you're removing that barrier, and now that barrier is gone, and now I can come in. I like that, to look at that from sort of an illustrative perspective. Of course, whatever happened, it appears that it was an amazing act that was meticulously orchestrated to transform Earth to a formless, empty blob into a place where life could survive and thrive. And God saw in verse 4, God saw the light was good, and he affirmed it and sustained it. God called the light day and the darkness night. So, you got light, you got energy, you got heat, things are progressing. So, and there's a lot of science that you can apply to the Bible here, but I don't know for time's sake. And it might be something we expound on at some other point in time. Let's go on to verse 6. Let there be expanse in the sky in the midst of the waters, let it separate the waters below the expanse from the water above the expanse. Just to be quick with this one, there's not a whole lot of frills for this one. It appears to be the sort of the development of our atmosphere, or the different layers of our atmosphere. A lot of water vapor, obviously, if water's still covering the whole earth. Light's coming in, humidity, cloudy, whatever. And it's describing this, what's illustrated here is just sort of that separating feature. Skipping ahead to verse 9. We got the dry land appearing. And what's from a scientific, what's being described here? What's Earth's crust, plate tectonics? Y'all remember your introduction to physical science, I believe. Things pushing together, moving. Here comes the land. The dry land's coming up. When the dry land's coming up, just as it says, the waters get dispersed right into the places. And the Bible says, and it was so. God called the dry land earth, and he called the waters the sea. So, within this text, there's a connection here. And I got to thinking, we'll see down at the latter parts. And God makes us in his image and in his likeness. So you kind of like to think that things that excite me. Where did I get that from? Or excite us, I might say. I think we got that from God. And one thing I've been thinking about here is, a lot of these things that happen on these individual days or time periods are singular. We did one thing and did the next thing. Well, here we've got two things. And it's almost, the verse 11 gets us to, it's almost like God was anxious. He was ready to do something. And of course, if you've got water, and you got light, and you got dirt, well, what else do you need if you've got a farming nature and you're a gardening nature. You've got everything you need. He doesn't wait for the next time period. He says in verse 11, same as the earth. Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees bearing fruit. Go into the verse. Again, that's not a creative word in there, but it's sort of perhaps even a continuation of the creation event of day one. Sort of setting things in motion and then fine-tuning them as we go along the way. Scientific view, the presence of light, adherence to dry land, the collection of necessary elements, the presence of water, all suggest conditions capable of sustaining plant life. And it was so. So in verse 14. Now I'll take a little review of 14. You can read it for what it says. There's a little bit of some folks read it one way, some folks read it another way. I want to just leave it at that. And the particular way that I read it may not necessarily be the way you read it. But let me see if we get something to describe what's happening here. The end result, when I get to the end, it's going to be the same result. So, kind of grabbing from our scientific side here. We know, just from basic plant biology, that what do plants need to thrive, to as they first sprout and abundantly produce? Well, they need carbon. Carbon's one of the building blocks that those things need. And because, so it would be suggested that the atmosphere at this point in time may be still pretty cloudy. Cloudy in the sense of, we're not that far removed from when there's water vapor everywhere. These plants need carbon. It's not a leap to thank God that the atmosphere had a lot of carbon at that point, because that's what all these plants would need. Okay? So I want to describe what's happening in verse 14 as sort of the photosynthetic process coming to fruition. You might say, I don't see that written there. Okay, fine. Stay with, hang with it. This photosynthetic, some of you back row guys and gals, photosynthesis. Remember that one? I know we're at the end of the school year here. But y'all know what that process is. Plants take carbon out of the air, convert it with light and energy, and what do they release? Help me out here. Oxygen? Okay. We'll give y'all an A- on the back. Right? So this photosynthesis is pulling carbon out of the air, and the implication, there's a lot of carbon there. Cloudy, it's opaque. Carbon being removed, oxygen being replaced. Carbon being removed, oxygen being replaced. This process coming to fruition, the more oxygen is out there, eventually this opaque sky turns clear. And that's where we are today. Because that cloudiness would have been sort of a permanent cloudiness from a scientific perspective. And it's consistent with the text. So we've got this clouds removed. Well, then, what do we see? We see what it says in verse 14. Let there be light bearers, sun, moon, and stars in the expanse of the heavens. I think there's the end result of verse 14, however you might read it from a time constraint or a chronological construct. The end result is, hey, sun, moon, and stars are now visible. And again, that word there, that let is, again, not in its raw creative form, but creation nonetheless. So let's pushing here for time. Let's go back down to verse 20. Remember we talked about that word bara. It's fixing to come back. It comes up once in verse 1, 2 more times. It comes up here in verse 21, actually. So we've got the plants growing. Now, what's one unique thing? And God is just awesome. It's just unbelievable how you look at how some of this works. Plants, as we know, plants don't just reproduce for the sole purpose of propagating themselves. You have an apple tree, and it has an apple with a seed. Well, what's it there for? Well, if it falls on the ground and dirt gets over, well, another tree. That's part of God's process. But if it's working like it's supposed to work, it's not just one apple or 2. There's an abundance of apples. So they're producing stuff that has nothing to do with their survival or propagation or existence. Well, why is that? What purpose would God have in making things that produce beyond what they need? Well, he's got a plan. Just like he has a plan for each one of us. He's showing us he's got a plan here. I got something in place because I got something coming, and I need to have it already ready. We talked to, I think Pastor Tom just, your healing, already there. Everything that we need from the spiritual sense, it's already been provided for. Here in this physical sense, something's coming, he's already making provisions for it. Well, what's coming? Verse 20, animals. Let the waters swarm and abundantly produce living creatures. Let the birds soar above the earth and in the open expanse of heaven. And then 21, we go on with some further creation of animal life. And again, we talked about that word bara. So it's not necessarily in this order, but I kind of like to think of this in 2 separate ways. You've got 2 different classes of animals. A lot of school guys and gals will remember this. You kind of have cold-blooded animals and warm-blooded animals. and they have different, certain characteristics. Generally, the cold-blooded animals are really simply instinctive. They're basically all business. Eat and sleep and reproduce, and that's about all they do. They're not jumping around and playing. I think of an alligator. What's he do? Well, he does those three things, and that's about all he does. And there's not that bara creative word attached to the creation or the making or the forming of those animals. But what it does connect to is what might be described as generally the warm-blooded animal. And what is this new creative? What is this bara? That word in verse 21, creative, is that word. It's that creative something out of nothing. Well, it's something new. Well, what is it? What the word here, the Hebrew word here, is nephesh. And it's sort of the definition of it is soulish. So you're talking about animals. Yeah, I'm talking about animals. Well, that's soulish attributes manifesting themselves in animals. You think, what are you talking about, Willis? But I'm serious. And you might think, I'll give you an example, and I think if you're confused, I think you'll get it just like that. How many of you have animal dogs? A lot of you do, right? And you've seen alligators. So you know that, and I'm not talking about just the physical difference, but your dog, as most of you well know, is not just eating, sleeping, doing like the alligator, right? He's doing some other stuff. He's playing, he's jumping, he's doing things totally unnecessary to its survival. When they're happy, when they're sad, there's a little bit. I bet you, you don't have to raise your hand. I bet most of you talk to your dog. And so what's this new thing? It's this soulish, it's this mind, will, emotions, it's this creative something totally new. It's just awesome when you think about it. And you go, well, I'm not quite with you. I'll give you one specific example. How many of you ever caught your dog getting in the trash can, right? So you come around the corner, there's a dog in the trash can, and you say, hey, and the dog looks at you. Describe the look on the dog's face. What is it? Guilt. It's guilt. That's not eating, sleep, and reproduction. That's something beyond that. And it's amazing. You think, what's the purpose of it? Think of all the enjoyment that we have today because God placed that attribute in the animals then that we get the use and enjoyment of. And it's just one part of it. God preparing something for something else is coming. So we get to, and I'll be trying to move here really quick. We get into verse 25 or 24 and 25. The continuation of the animal making and forming the creation of the animal. The wild animals and the livestock. And here we start seeing things that, wow, if we think about it, all of these things that we are so totally dependent on from humans and have been over time are what's being created right here. You think of livestock, goats, cattle, horses, all the things that aided us in agriculture, aided us in transportation. God is was providing already in advance. All of those things are coming. Then we get to, I've skipped over a whole bunch here. Then we get to the last two, verse 26, the last use of that creative word bara, right? So in the first creative instance, back in verse 1, what's he created? All matter, all dirt, dust, elements, all of those sorts of things. We get here the verses we talked about just a little bit ago. We got something else. In addition to the bone, dirt, muscles, and flesh, we got these soulless sort of mind, will, and emotions that even express themselves in the animal. What we hear is, when we get to this last creative thing here in verse 27, It's what sets us apart from everything else. So God created man in his own image. In the image and likeness of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Male, female, what's missing? No alpha, right? I don't know what I'm talking about. No L's, no B's, no whatever JKL semicolons. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them and gave them authority. And the text implies here this, what's this? We're bodies are physical. We're just dust. We're just that. But we do have this mind, will, and emotion part of us. But what sets us apart and what this new thing is, what this bara, this creating something out of nothing here is, the text explicitly refers to this new aspect as being part of something God himself. God himself is in us. Man, you think about that. It makes all these other things that we'll read about later on and study later on. Yeah, I'm part of it. He's part of me. The same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead dwells in me. He will quicken my mortal body. So we can appreciate all the things. Now, sadly, I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. As we see in chapter 2 and beyond, something came in, they blew it, and there was this created this disconnect. That connection we had in this with the Spirit, sin came along and created a disconnect. Guess what? I have already had in mind a plan and a purpose to remedy that disconnect. Sin disconnection, of course, as we know, and this is where you get into the gospel and bringing people a remedy for that disconnect. We can be reconnected, not just back then, right here and now, anybody and everyone when we come into contact to. There's the message. And so, again, you can see I have flipped through a whole lot of pages that I haven't read off of them, but I hope this has helped some of you. Some of you have, hey, I already knew that, I already believe that, thank you. But again, there's other folks, that might not know what you know. They might not have that appreciation. They might not have had Sunday school. You need to be able, this is just a small, Genesis 1 is only 2% of the whole book of Genesis. A whole lot more out there that you can learn, that we can read, that we can understand, and we can gain knowledge and wisdom, knowledge and understanding and wisdom and discernment to do the best job that we can do to fulfill the great commission that we've got. So with that, I'm going to wrap up our online audience. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Hope you can join us right here. We'll be here Sunday morning, 9:45 Sunday school, 10:30 worship service, 6 o'clock on Sunday night. Of course, we'll be online right about 11 o'clock on Sunday. So we're going to have a little Q&A, perhaps, if we've got enough time here. But for your online audience, we love you. God loves you. We'll see you next time.